Welcome to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're going to be talking about the Dar Al-Hijrah Islamic Center. I'm going to have to practice that all night long. What I want you to know is our guest tonight, Stacey Picard, who's the Assistant Director of Social Services, and Saif Rahman, the Government and Public Affairs Director, are going to open the doors, in a manner of speaking, to the Islamic Center because many of you, like me, have never actually been inside an Islamic center. And one of the things that I find most interesting about Dar Al-Hijrah is the fact that it is really open to the wider community. And I think that's something, as you listen tonight, you're going to be very surprised about what an important player, what an important center this Islamic center is for the community all around it, not just for Muslims, but for the Vietnamese, for the Hispanic, for all of the people who live in and around this area. So let's get some background, Saif, if you don't mind kind of giving us the history of the Islamic Center and the fact that the mosque started first. I guess I was surprised because I confused the two. I conflated the mosque and the Islamic Center. And actually, one started, I think, first. So give us a little bit of background about the history.
So Dar Al-Hijrah Islamic Center, and it literally translates into the House of Migration, right? And the idea behind the name was when the Prophet Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina, Medina became the new home, and it was known as Dar Al-Hijrah. So therefore, this was the new home of the young migrant students at the time who were studying in local universities and decided that they were staying here and wanted to create a home. And it was started in 1983 in that small brick house that was purchased. And it was literally a place where people could gather and pray. And in the early 90s, we were able to and blessed to open the larger center. And we changed the programming from just a mosque to a full-on center, which mosques are supposed to be. They're supposed to be community centers where the community can come together for programming, for services, for everything associated with life. So essentially in 93, and here's the interesting fact, is the model Gigi Hadid. It was her father who built the center,
Oh, wow.
the larger building, and his name is actually still inscribed as you enter the building, built by Hadid Construction Company.
How about that? I had no idea. But I think I'm going to be surprised all night long about the things I don't understand. And the fact that, again, many of us have not been inside the Islamic Center. Stacey, I knew you before you actually got this job, which kind of started out as this part-time job. What I think is fascinating is that you are not Muslim. You are, in fact, Catholic, and you worked your day job back in Ohio had a lot to do with Catholic schools, I believe. So here you are, the Assistant Director of Social Services, and it's kind of a surprising place to be.
It is. It's very surprising. It wasn't something I had anticipated at this level. At the time, you're right, I was working in Ohio as a consultant helping private schools, primarily Catholic schools. And we moved to this area about 7 years ago for my husband's job. And when we did, I, through a series of events and working with different nonprofits to get to know the area, I started to do some story work. And I was doing quite a bit of story work with primarily women and students who had experienced trauma, helping them share their stories and expressing them in art, usually with creative writing or poetry or drama. And I learned of Dar Al-Hijrah and the extensive community outreach and especially the programming that they had for women there. And I learned that there was quite an outreach for the population of refugee women there. And I was interested in doing some of the story work with those refugee women. So a friend of mine connected me with the social services director, whose name is Tahani, and the one whose vision really has made this program as full and robust as it has become in recent years. And I met with her and liked her very much. We clicked right away. A lot of energy around the programming and around working with the women. But she said, I just don't have the funding right now, but let's keep talking about it and putting our heads together and see how we can think creatively about how to bring this to life. So we continued to meet every month or so. And finally she said, listen, I'd really like to work with you, but I don't have the money for this program. Would you help us start a senior program? And I reluctantly said yes. And that was my first toe in the water at Al-Hijrah. And that led to another program that I helped to get started there. And I just became pulled in further and further, a little bit more and a little bit more, until it became the essentially full-time job that it is today.
And I think that's remarkable because, first of all, it should be a lesson to all of us to sometimes say yes to the improbable.
Absolutely.
Because that's where some of the best things are, the things you just can't imagine. But I know your work, the work that you have been doing, especially in social services, and the fact, as you have explained it to me, when people come here to this area and they're new and they're Muslim and they're immigrants or refugees, the mosque is the first place that they go. And so the collaborative relationships that you've also put together are quite extensive.
Yeah, that's right, Catherine. A big part of my job is really community outreach. We have an outreach department, but community outreach under the social services umbrella means knowing what other direct service providers are out there and what services they're providing to their clients. Because many times I feel like the best thing we can do is serve as an access point to help our clients get to the people that are already offering those services, rather than duplicating those services or fighting for the funding for services when someone else is already doing that thing very well in the community. But as you said, the reality is that for someone who's new to the country, we are the first place they'll come. They'll feel safe and they'll have trust there. And so we need to give them a welcoming reception and be able to guide them and help them navigate all the things that are available to them that they might not be familiar with. They might come from a place where those kinds of county resources are not provided, so it could be a very new experience for them.
So, Saif, explain a little bit about the place where the Islamic Center is located. Northern Virginia is a huge place. Fairfax County is a huge place. It's got, we have millions of people here. And so in the immediate area of the Islamic Center, who are the people who live around that area that the Islamic Center serves?
Well, it's interesting. I think the community has changed significantly over the years that the Islamic Center has been there. We like to say that the center serves the literally fresh off the boat to the second and third and fourth generation American Muslims, as well as the larger community. And that's the reality at Al-Hijrah. I'm a person who is a second generation immigrant, and I grew up in this center. And you have the people who not just are coming from overseas, but people coming from other states, for example, who want to get to know the community, and they come in. The center is essentially open the whole day because, as Muslims, we've got 5 daily prayers. The first prayer right now is about 5:30 or 6 in the morning. So the center is open from then, and the last prayer of the day is at 9:20 p.m. So throughout that day, that center is open, and people come through the center. For a typical prayer, we'll have 200 or 300 people. And then the main sermon days are Friday sermons, where we'll have 3 different prayers with 1,200 to 1,300 people per prayer. So in that sense, the center is always open. Our offices are open. Social services is there almost all the time. Every time I'm there, I see Stacey or Zahra or Tahani or someone else with social services. But the idea is that the center needs to be a place that is welcoming, that is open for people. And I think that is our challenge, particularly in light of the larger security environment that we see ourselves in these days. But Fairfax County has also changed. Fairfax County is a county with 1.2 million people. And I think in the next 20 or 30 years is going to be a majority-minority county.
I think Prince William County right now, Elizabeth Guzman said to us, is the only majority county in Virginia is Prince William County.
Wow.
So for those of us just joining our show, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with Saif Rahman and Stacey Picard. They are with Al-Hijrah in Falls Church. And I want to talk a little bit about, is it Bailey's Crossroads? How do you identify the area? And describe a little bit about how that area where the center is located is vastly different from other parts of the county, just as a place.
So it'll be probably closer. So we sit literally between Seven Corners and Bailey's Crossroads. I think it would be more accurate to describe it as Colmore,
Colmore.
Colmore community, predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, and we service a lot of our Hispanic neighbors coming through with a lot of the social services. But we are also partnered with the churches that are across the street. By the grace of God, the church across the street, the First Christian Church and the Church of Christ, allow us to use parking on our sermon days because our parking lot doesn't take the numbers of people. But we've partnered with them with one of the social services program. I'll let Stacey mention that.
Yeah, at First Christian Church across the street, we've had a long-time partnership where they have a Thursday program called the Safe Haven Feed the Needy program, where they invite in the homeless for a hot lunch and showers, haircuts, clothing closet, that sort of thing. You might be surprised to know that at Dar Al-Hijrah, we have a full commercial kitchen and chef. We feed a lot of people. And so we provide the food for the hot lunch for the homeless at the Safe Haven program at First Christian on the fourth Thursday of every month.
Wow. So, again, the partnership with the church across the street, I think this would surprise a lot of people. There's been a lot of really harsh rhetoric around Muslims in this country, in this area. Being a Muslim is not monolithic either. It's a religion, like being a Christian, but people come from so many different countries, so many different ethnicities, so many different backgrounds. They speak so many different languages. You know, to have a center that basically tries to serve the needs of such diversity, even within the Muslim faith. How do you manage things like language?
English. The other program that we have with First Christian Church is the Colmore Clinic, which they're hosting, and we are a member of. And that's a free clinic for the people of the Colmore community that need it. But managing people, and what I want to emphasize here is that Islam was never something foreign to these lands. Something, I took my family to an island off of Georgia called Sapelo Island.
Right.
And we discovered that there were plantation records written in the Arabic language, and it happened because it was an enslaved African Muslim who actually was able to read and write. And the plantation owner, who happened to be a U.S. Senator at the time, Thomas Spalding, I believe it was, entrusted him to keep the plantation records. So he kept them in the Arabic language, and they've been preserved at the University of Georgia Library and were most recently in the African American History Museum in Washington. So Islam is not new to these lands, and what we're trying to do is to manage the generational differences between the Muslims, whether they be the second, third, fourth, fifth generation Muslims and some of the newer Muslim community. And it gets difficult with some of the cultural practices, right? And that's I think where the difference, the language, we have 50 languages spoken at Dar Al-Hijrah Islamic Center, but the main sermon languages are actually in English. The prayers obviously are in the Arabic language because that's the language of the Quran in the typical prayers. But the sermons are all in the English language, and most of the lessons are in the English language.
Which is very helpful, I am sure. That is just astonishing to me about the plantation records. I mean, this is the first time I have heard anything like that. And I'm sure there's probably other aspects of history and the role of people from Muslim countries who've been part of this country from the beginning. We did a show last week with C.R. Gibbs about the first arrival of enslaved people to Virginia in 1619, and the New York Times has been doing the 1619 Project because it's history that hasn't been written down. It hasn't been taught. We tend to have a narrative, a mythology that we teach in this country and call it history, and it's not. And the very fact that this could exist, and it's at the University of Georgia Library, and is amazing to me that this is the first time that I've ever heard of this at all. So I think we have to talk about how we reshape the perspective of who people think Muslims are. Who are the people who are coming to the Islamic Center? Stacey, with the social services, again, you are reaching out to the people in the surrounding Colmore community, the Hispanics and the Vietnamese. There are so many different programs that you have that really are trying to help people to be self-sufficient, to figure out what to do for a job, to figure out health care and housing. That to me seems like an enormous undertaking, especially in a community where there is high poverty.
It is. It's a big need in the area. It's a very interesting area in Culmore because, we're nestled in one of the wealthiest counties in the United States of America, and 3 of the surrounding counties are in the top 5 wealthiest counties. But as Saif alluded to, the area that we're in is one of 3 census tracts that has the highest food insecurity in the state of Virginia. So there's a great pocket of need there. And some of it is due to the fact that people are just arriving and getting their homes established, or they're refugees seeking asylum that don't have their authorization to work yet, or they need time to get themselves established and settled here. So that is part of the reason that the social services programs have grown to be as wide and deep as they are. And they essentially fall under 3 umbrellas. Of course, there's family assistance. So there are things like emergency rental assistance for someone who's facing eviction. Saif mentioned the community health days. For people who are uninsured, we can refer them to a primary care provider, pardon me, even if they're uninsured or undocumented. We have a weekly food bank distribution every Thursday morning. Over 800 people are registered for that food bank distribution. So we have those kinds of family assistance programs. This morning, a family arrived. They've just been in the U.S. for a few weeks from Sri Lanka. They have nothing. They're just looking to get settled. So we were able to give them some furniture, clothing from our thrift store. Today was our food bank distribution day, so we were able to send them with some meat and fresh vegetables for food and give them, as I said, a referral for primary care just to help get them started, and then they'll become part of the community. But we also have a large number of single moms, for whatever reason. They may be divorced. They may have lost their husbands to violence. They may have escaped domestic violence. And because of that, a lot of the self-sufficiency programming has evolved over the years. So we've developed a progressive track, primarily for the women, where they begin with ESL. They learn the English language, and then they can go into a sewing program. They receive 100 hours of instruction under a professional seamstress, and then they receive a brand new sewing machine when they graduate. So they're able to work from home and still care for their children, whether they have their papers or not. We also offer basic computer skills. We partner with Computer Corps to offer that class. We offer CPR certification for many of the women who work in healthcare and childcare. We're able to offer it at a significant discount than the other classes in the area. So those types of classes are designed to help empower them and give them work skills that they may not have to be able to contribute to their family's income and their success.
Well, for those of you just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I am your host, Catherine Reed, and today we are talking with Stacey and with Saif from Al-Hijrah. I'm getting better at this. Al-Hijrah Islamic Center. I'm going to keep practicing. Islamic Center here in Northern Virginia. You're listening to Radio Fairfax. And we were talking about social services and trying to help people get careers, housing, basic necessities, food, and medical care. When you talk about helping people to learn English, some of the issues that I know that the Literacy Council of Northern Virginia comes up against is the lack of literacy in people's own native languages. Is this something that, again, is kind of segmenting the people you're trying to help, people who need a little bit more help because they've got greater hurdles?
That is a challenge. Many are, as you say, illiterate in their first language. So to come and then try to learn English makes it a little bit more difficult for them. We actually partner with the Literacy Council of Northern Virginia to offer our ESL classes. For 5 years, we had an ESL program started by some women in the community that grew over those 5 years, and really that was the foundation of our ESL program, because it was as much about building confidence and bringing the women together in community, in a safe space where they felt they could push themselves a little bit and gain the confidence they needed to learn a new language. This year, we had been hosting an intensive ESL class from the Literacy Council of Northern Virginia with a workforce credential attached to it. So they teach it with a hospitality credential that prepares them to work in, say, retail, hotel front desk type positions. And so this fall, we've piloted having our students attend those classes as well. And they, as you know, LCNV is a fantastic
They
organization, and I just can't say enough about them and the tools and the professionalism that they bring to that program. But it couldn't exist without the work that the women did to establish that program the way they did.
And that's the other thing. When you think about the fact that this was founded in 1983 and the Islamic Center was built in 1993, and as you pointed out, Saif, the area has changed a lot, and you serve more and more people. So, 3,000 people on a Friday is astonishing to me that come for the prayers. How are you helping to sort of change the perspective of what people in Northern Virginia understand about who your community is?
So one of the premier programs that we have is our Taste of Islam program. It happens every April, I believe it is, and we actually open up the mosque's doors to our local community, and we highlight the different cultures, including, soul food, essentially. But we bring foods from all around the Muslim world and have people come and enjoy food as well as information and to visit a mosque. And that's something that we do once a year, which is a premier program. But we also host weekly open houses where people will come and visit the mosque. And you can actually go to our website, www.hijrah.org. And there's a request to actually do a tour of the mosque. So you're more than welcome. Everyone is more than welcome to do so. The mosque is open, and we welcome anyone to come and visit at any time. And that's the idea. The idea is we want to make sure that we are open to the community and that we are a place of a safe haven for that community. We are working actually on a project to expand the center and build a community center that would be open to the larger community. This is a long-term project that we're working on. And it would be a community center that would be a real community center for that community in the area that hopefully will have, places for youth, sports and whatnot, as well as having spaces for meetings and things like that. So, that's our long-term goal and plans, and we hope that we're able to do so. Talking about the center itself, I had mentioned that we are part of the Complete Count Committee for Fairfax County and the census. So on the 25th of September, we are actually hosting a lunch for all of the Fairfax County groups associated with the census and trying to get people to get counted. So you're more than welcome to come have lunch with all the groups associated.
What's that date again?
September 25th.
Okay.
It'll be at 11:30.
Okay.
And we are hosting all of the groups working on the census to make sure that the Fairfax County community is counted.
And and you were talking a little bit about the fact that you sit on that county committee, and that there's a real dilemma in the community that you serve between needing to count people because there is a real financial impact to the county over 10 years when people are not counted. On the other hand, we live in very uncertain times where immigration policy seems to change on a daily basis. And so people feel threatened and at risk. And it seems to me it really has put the center, how you're trying to work with people, both of you, when you talk about how they should respond to the census.
It's a challenge. So the vast majority of our community are either I'm saying the vast majority are either citizens or legal permanent residents. There is obviously that percentage that are the undocumented. And I think that's the challenge, because what do you tell someone who is undocumented? It's a life decision for them if for one way or another that census data is used incorrectly. But we found that our community, I think we're at a 78% voter turnout rate from the community that's registered, which is phenomenal for the center.
That's high.
And we're working on making sure that anyone that does need help gets it. And I think the challenge now is how to manage making sure for someone who is undocumented, how to make sure they are counted without getting harmed because of their undocumented status.
And that's the case because you're also working, as we've mentioned before, with the greater Hispanic community and the Vietnamese community, which also come in for your social programs. They're part of the life of the center, and so there might be some populations that you serve are just more at risk than other members of the community that you serve. And that's kind of probably a larger discussion for us to have, but. Before we go to break, I just want to remind people that you do have a website. You are on Instagram. You are at Hijrah VA, HIJRAH VA, and that's Instagram and Twitter. And you also have a Facebook page, and that people can engage with you on social media and find out the programs that you offer and the fact that people are welcome to take a tour. So you are listening to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. We are talking with Stacey and with Saif from Al-Hijrah Islamic Center. I'm getting better. Join us after the break.
We are Radio Fairfax.
Rivers of Living Water is a program that features uplifting sermons, abundant grace, unwavering faith, spirit-led life, work of the cross of Jesus in the radical of our Heavenly Father.
You're a good Father.
Tune in to Rivers of Living Water, Fridays at 4 p.m. on Radio Fairfax.
It's who you are.
Hello, my name's Matthew Moore, the host of the Psychedelic Circus. The circus has moved. I'm on Sunday nights now from 6 to 8 p.m. Join me for the Psychedelic Circus, where the buzz can shake you clean.
In 1957, Frank Sinatra said,
"Rock and roll smells phony and false. It is sung, played, and written for the most part by cretinous goons. It manages to be the martial music of every sideburn delinquent on the face of the earth. It is the most brutal, ugly, desperate, vicious form of expression it has ever been my misfortune to hear."
Way to go, Frank. If you agree with him, good luck to you. But if you want to hear some good early rock and roll and rockabilly, tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. to The Professor Rocks.
There are a ton of social networking websites, but one stands apart for a very special reason. This one saves lives. It's MatchingDonors.com. MatchingDonors.com links organ donors with people in need of kidney and other transplants. In the U.S., 19 people die each day waiting for an organ transplant, most of them for kidneys. If you've ever considered becoming a living organ donor, or if you're someone in need of an organ transplant, visit MatchingDonors.com, home of the greatest gift of all, the gift of life, MatchingDonors.com.
An important message from Medicare.
When my son first told me about extra help from Medicare, I said, thanks, but no thanks. I didn't want any help paying for my prescriptions. I told him, I don't have much money coming in, but I still have my pride. Besides, I looked into it a couple years ago. I figured if I didn't qualify then, I wouldn't qualify now either. My, oh my, am I ever glad my son didn't give up on me. He reminded me that I was on a limited income and that it was easier than ever for people like me to qualify. So I called, and he was right. Now I pay just a few dollars for generics and a few dollars more for brand name prescriptions. With extra help, I can afford the prescriptions I need. Thanks, Medicare.
Get the extra help you need to stay healthy. Visit socialsecurity.gov or call 1-800-772-1213.
Radio Fairfax is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Fairfax, Virginia.
Keeping the First Amendment alive. We are Radio Fairfax, Fairfax County's public access and internet radio station.
Welcome to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Stacey and Saif from Al-Hijrah Islamic Center. And one of the things that we want to talk about here tonight on Radio Fairfax is sort of the concept of who the Muslims are in our community. And there's been a lot of otherizing of Muslims. There's been a lot of very negative rhetoric that has painted Muslims not just as terrorists, which is a ridiculous trope, but one that has embedded itself in our culture, especially since 9/11. But the fact of the matter is, Muslims have always been Americans. They've been here, as Saif mentioned before, since the early days of colonialism and slavery and plantations. Clearly not ever been taught as American history. I have never heard this as American history. So I want Saif to give us a little mini history lesson on just how a part of the fabric Muslims have been in our country since its beginning.
So, Catherine, one of the interesting thing is, I don't know if you all ever heard the folk song "Hi Jolly." There's a folk song that's history, and there's actually a monument in Arizona to Hi Jolly, and it's a great little folk song, and it actually goes back to a Syrian person who was brought by the U.S. administration, who thought that bringing a herd of camels to be able to traverse the western deserts of the United States
would be a good idea. Yeah.
So the person to bring to take care of the camels was a man named Hajj Ali. And of course, the Americanization of his name was now Hi Jolly. And now there's a folk song, and there's actually a monument in Arizona to this gentleman who started the Camel Corps of the U.S. military, I think it was, or whatever it was. But Americans, Muslims, and Muslims are so intertwined with the society that it's not new. I mentioned the plantation in Georgia. This is repeated across many places. One of the oldest mosques in America is actually in North Dakota, and it goes back to the 1800s or earlier. And of course, there's data to suggest that upwards of 30% of enslaved Africans that were brought to our shores were Muslim because of the places that they were being brought from. So the idea that Islam or Muslims are not native to the United States is something that is really anathema to our history. The other interesting element is the first nation to recognize us as a nation when we declared our independence was Morocco. And that's interesting because that's a Muslim nation, and there were historical ties back and forth. And there's letters between Jefferson and Washington and many of the Muslim leaders across the globe who were supporting our cause of independence at the time. So I think the idea that Muslims are not native here or that cannot be American or cannot be loyal to the country is something that, unfortunately goes towards a long line of tropes, right? So it was the Native Americans, then it was, the Jews and the Italians and the Catholics. And we seem to do this to otherize others until we come to our senses and see that doesn't make sense. I think if you read the history of Kennedy's presidency, for example, and the Catholic, he's going to be listening to the Pope and not listen to the American people, right? And that kind of reminds me of what's being done today. And unfortunately, we haven't learned our lessons in history, and I think we need to.
I think you're right. I think one of the things that has given me hope about Virginia, and I always like to mention that 2019 is an election year in Virginia because every year is an election year in Virginia. And people just peter out. The turnout peters out in that fourth year of our cycle, even though the greatest number of people are elected in the off-year election. Only 30% of Virginians actually get out and vote for them. But I am seeing greater diversity in our legislature, people running for Commonwealth's attorney, people running for the school board, people running for the board of supervisors, and you're starting to see names that look unfamiliar. And some people find that very threatening. But other people are saying finally, our legislature and our elected bodies are starting to look like our communities. And I think that is such a positive thing, and yet the headlines are still focusing in on these tropes about terrorism and who is a terrorist.
Our Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Virginia is a Muslim.
Out of Kearney.
Is a Marine Corps veteran. Went to school with my wife at GW, so we've known each other. But again, he's a Marine Corps veteran, American Muslim, but he's our Secretary of Education, and there's no reason for him not to be. But what I want you to ask is I want you to ask Stacey, because Stacey's been working with the Muslims at Dar al-Hijrah for the last, how long has it been, Stacey?
About a year and a half.
What is it like?
What is it like?
I'm glad you asked, actually, because I would like to comment on this. As you mentioned, I am a Catholic, and for me, living the gospel as a Catholic is, among other things, primarily about walking with people who are hurting. It's about extending a hand to the poor and living with each other and helping those who are in need. And in that sense, I have often said to Tahani, the director of social services at Dar al-Hijrah, that I think she's the best Catholic I've ever known. And they will often joke with me that they can't believe I'm not Islam because they're the same. They're the same. Islam is a beautiful religion, and I've known beautiful people with beautiful hearts in the short time that I've been there, about a year and a half. Saif mentioned the sermons that are on Fridays. There are 3 of them, and he said there are about 1,300 at each of them. I run a lot of programs at Dar al-Hijrah, and so I'm often there on Fridays talking with the women to encourage them to register for a class or let them know what programs are coming up. So I hear all of these sermons. And I can tell you that I never hear anything being talked about but mercy and justice and peace and charity. These are the things that I hear being preached in the mosque. So it's unfortunate that there are bad actors, of course, in
everywhere.
Catholicism and in Islam.
In every group, there are bad actors.
Yeah, but I wish, Catherine, as you know, I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, and so I so much appreciate the richness and the diversity of the community. I just think it makes everyone better, makes everyone stronger, and I really appreciate that at Dar al-Hijrah as well.
When I was talking with C.R. Gibbs, about what divides us, and he said that there's more things that we have in common than the things that divide us, and yet we tend to keep focusing for whatever reason. They keep talking about how divisive everything is and how polarized we are. But the fact of the matter is we all belong to the family of humanity, and every day we need to be looking around to see how we have someone else's back. Not to assume that people are bad actors, but quite the opposite. Assume that people that you meet are acting in good faith and that they expect you to act in good faith, and that we should approach everybody in our community with kindness and charity and justice, and see how we can enlarge our embrace to a much larger community. And so if you're just joining us, we're Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. I'm talking with Stacey Picard and Saif Rahman, who are from Dar al-Hijrah Islamic Center. I'm learning to pronounce that as I go along, by the way. And it's been an interesting conversation because I have never been in an Islamic center. I've never been in a mosque. I just haven't.
Now you have an invitation.
And now I have an invitation. I got September 25th right on my calendar to talk about the census. But how can people participate? I mean, I think a lot of times people need a reason. Who volunteers at the Islamic Center? Is there a role for people to play who say, I want to be part of serving the Culmore community?
Absolutely. And let me mention a couple of things. Yes, there are many volunteer activities. As I said, we have a food bank distribution every Thursday morning. We have a tutoring program for middle school to high school teens to help them primarily with advanced math. There are numerous opportunities to volunteer, and those are just a couple examples from social services. Dar al-Hijrah has other departments as well. We have a very strong interfaith outreach department. As you mentioned, Saif is the director of public and government affairs. We have a very strong youth department that engages our youth. So there are many opportunities to volunteer, but there are also opportunities to visit. All are always welcome at Dar al-Hijrah at any of our programs. Our interfaith outreach department hosts a cup of tea, solidarity cup of tea once a month, where they discuss various topics with people from different communities, faith communities in the area. There are many, many opportunities. One of the ways that I first entered Dar al-Hijrah was during Ramadan, you may or may not know that the Muslims will fast during the day from sunrise to sunset, and then they'll break that fast with a meal called iftar at sunset. And at Dar al-Hijrah, there's a community iftar meal held every evening of Ramadan, which is 30 days long. And they feed 1,000 people or more each night. So over 30,000 people, I believe, are fed during Ramadan. But each week, in addition to the community members of the mosque, they will have special invitations to the outside community. Bring a friend to learn more about Islam. They'll invite first responders, public officials, public educators. That's a great way to come to the mosque as well. And as Saif mentioned, Taste of Islam is a wonderful way to dip your toe in and not be too intimidated by all of it.
So absolutely, Stacey, and so it's every Tuesdays during Ramadan. We finished the month of Ramadan recently, but every Tuesdays we have actually the open nights for Bring a Friend to Iftar, and every Wednesdays we invite public officials as well as interfaith partners. But Dar al-Hijrah is also a member of Voice, Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement. I'm actually a member of the strategy team of Voice, and we get together with other faith communities to actually fight for social justice. One of the issues that we were working on recently, for example, was making sure that people who had court costs couldn't be
the driver
licenses.
issues.
Exactly.
That
this was
so
something
huge.
that was raised with the governor and the attorney general. And actually, when the attorney general was ready to announce his decision, he held a private meeting with the Voice leadership to tell them this was what he was going to do. And it's because these types of things, these are larger community issues, and we feel like the faith community needs to come together to really work on justice for the community. And that's our role as Muslims, as Dar al-Hijrah, to do that. And that's why the mosque has to stay open to the larger community so that we know what's happening in the community so we can fight for justice in that community. But people are more than welcome to join our programs. We've got a Voice team that actually meets, a civic engagement team that meets every Thursday evening. I'm actually missing tonight's meeting because I'm here. But we also have other meetings that happen regularly, events that happen regularly at the mosque. We've had a sisters program that is led by our director of women's programs, an African-American Muslim convert who leads our women's programs at Dar al-Hijrah, Sister Aisha Prime. So the mosque is open, really is, and that's not just lip service. You're more than welcome to stop by and check out what we're doing. And I'll say something about the sermons because Stacey mentioned them. So we had a politician actually attend one of the sermons, and I'm trying to remember if it was a senator or someone else, but I asked him, and I happened to be giving the sermon that day, and I asked him after the sermon, so what did you think? He said, well, it sounded like I was sitting in a Catholic mass. So I was like, yeah, that's it. I mean, so there's no difference.
Right. And this comes back to core values, and this is what I say about why people need to vote too. You need to vote your values, because if you don't do it, the person sitting next to you on the bus, or the person who lives next door to you, or the person, they decide for you. They decide what the value is for the entire community. When people don't take that opportunity, voting is both a right and it's a responsibility. And when you think about 30%, people talk about, criminal justice reform. Well, if you don't vote for your Commonwealth's attorney, where do you plan to start with criminal justice reform? If you don't go out and choose who represents you in the state legislature, how do you plan to attack some of these bigger issues, like the driver's license suspensions for unpaid court fines and fees? That's only for 1 year because they put it in as a budget item. So how are we going to make that permanent? Well, guess what? If you don't vote, you don't get a voice. The person that represents your values, who says this is an important part of justice in our community, they don't hear you when you don't vote. And there's a lot of people who think you just don't talk about religion and you just don't talk about politics because you don't want to make people uncomfortable. It seems to me we are way past that. We are way past that. And some of the things you're talking about with Voice, we worked with them for affordable housing in Fairfax City. And that was one of their big issues. I love the fact that the interfaith communities have decided to translate justice and public policy to the core values of people's faith. And that's, and I know that's sort of the nexus of what you do, Saif, is trying to pull all of those pieces together.
And I think it's, Catherine, I think the one thing that we need to do, other than the important thing of voting, is to actually talk with one another.
Yes.
I think that it's ignorance of one another's understandings of values, of backgrounds, that breeds some sort of animosity, and that will lead to hatred, and that will lead to violence sometimes. And I think that undermining that ignorance by actually speaking with one another, understanding each other's values and backgrounds and experiences, I think that's the way that we're going to get beyond and get past a lot of the animosity that exists and the divisiveness that exists in our politics. And that's why we are making the extra effort to open the mosque out and go out of the Islamic Center to the community, so that the community sees us as we are. And I think all houses of worship that hold these values, and all of them do, should do that, so that we can foster this dialogue in the community and heal some of the divisiveness that exists.
I agree. And, this is interesting, too. I can't look at Stacey and know that she's a Catholic. And I look at you, Saif, and I know this is radio. But it's like, I don't look at you and go, I bet he's Muslim. But there are people whose ethnic background means that they are identified by their country of origin, perhaps, which immediately identifies them as someone who is Muslim. How is that impacting our ability to have a dialogue when people make assumptions from the very minute they set eyes on you about who they think you are?
And that's why I think that we need to take the proactive step of dialogue and the proactive step of actually speaking with one another instead of speaking at each other. One of the, as great as social media has been to the information flow in our society, but one of the problems that it's caused is that we've gotten into our own little kind of bubbles, and we've kind of forgotten how to just sit down and have a chat with one another and speak with one another about our shared experiences and backgrounds. And I think that's so important for communities to do. I should understand what, an African-American male faces when they get pulled over by a police officer. There's no way as a person who's considered to be Caucasian that I would understand that. I should understand what a Muslim feels, for example, when they go through an airport checkpoint, because they know that, they've got to be on their best behavior, otherwise they're going to get pulled aside for that screening. I should understand what a Hispanic family feels when they have to think about whether they're going to eat dinner together that evening, or whether one is going to get pulled, one way or another. I should understand what each of these communities' backgrounds and experiences are, so that we as a community as a whole can actually make each other comfortable and understand that when I'm speaking from a background, it's a shared experience that people have gone through.
I think that's called radical empathy. And I'm all about radical empathy. For those of you just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And tonight we're talking with Stacey Picard and Saif Rahman, who are both from Dar Al-Hijrah Islamic Center. One of the things here on Radio Fairfax, I might add, one of the things I want to ask you about working with so many women, Stacey, is for the people who are more recent arrivals versus maybe people who've been here for more than one generation. There's a movement in this country about women's equality, about recognizing women and equality under the law. When you approach women who are dealing with being in, let's say, a new country and trying to take care of their family and trying to figure out income and housing, how do you think they feel about the culture of this country and raising children here especially, when their children are being raised in an environment that's maybe not the environment they were raised in?
Well, you can imagine, Catherine, if you put yourself in their shoes, what you would feel like if you were dropped into their culture. And obviously there would be an adjustment. So, yes, there is an adjustment, I think, to suggest, and I don't think you are suggesting this, but it would be easy to suggest based on their background or where they came from, or that they wear a hijab, or that they're Muslim. In America, through an American lens, some people might think they're not empowered women. This is another misnomer about Muslim people, Muslim women. So the fact that they're different than what we think an empowered woman looks like in America does not mean that they're not strong and empowered women. I have become a part of a community of women at Dar Al-Hijrah that are fierce and that I really appreciate. But it is a cultural adjustment with the kids, as you mentioned,
Because they're in public school.
They're in public schools. And many of our families, I will say, are homeschooled. So when they get to middle school, high school, and they start to face issues that are challenges for anyone at that age who's coming of age, many families will pull them out and homeschool their children. So that's one of the reasons that we offer a tutoring program. All of the programs under that umbrella have evolved for one reason or another, and that's one of the reasons that tutoring was developed. Similarly, we offer a foster care information system to encourage more Muslim families to become foster parents, because we were noticing that sometimes for a newly arrived family where discipline in their home country might look a little different than what's acceptable in the U.S., the child would be temporarily taken out of the home and put in an American home where the culture was very different, which adds another layer of complication for the child. So we started to offer foster care training to encourage more Muslim families to become foster parents. So there is a little bit of an adjustment, as you might imagine, but they are every bit empowered women.
Oh, no, I believe that. I just think anytime because we pride ourselves on being so multicultural in Fairfax County, and some of our schools are very multicultural. Yes. I think, Marshall High School has like 120 different languages spoken. And so for people who are trying to adjust and figure out the culture, and then your children are in school, and I wonder how much more difficult it is when kids come home from school and they are exposed to a lot of things that might be really unfamiliar.
I have to comment on something about the schools, because with all of the programs that we have, and as Saif mentioned, as open as we are, sometimes one of our greatest challenges is to get people to come to the programs. It can be difficult to get the word out, or as you said, it might just be intimidating to come to a mosque if you've never been to one before. The parent liaisons in the Fairfax County Public Schools do a phenomenal job of helping the families that are in those schools from different backgrounds, different cultures. They help with language and culture issues, and they help connect them to resources. And I find them to be an invaluable resource. We're actually starting next week a family engagement series. We've done this in the past, and we're starting it again now that we're at that back-to-school time. Every Tuesday for 6 weeks, we're holding sessions with a different topic, different speaker each week, where we connect parents of school-age children with the school resources that are available to them. So we're offering an overview of the Parent Resource Center for FCPS. We're having our local Mason District police officer come and talk about gang prevention, anti-bullying, special needs advocates to talk about how to navigate your child's IEP and get the resources you need. And on the 10th will be an open house where the teachers and principals, the principals, parent liaisons, and social workers are coming, so families have an opportunity to meet them and put a face to a name, because they're such valuable connectors in the community.
Oh, the school system is hard for any parent to navigate. I had like 3 kids in the Fairfax County Public Schools, and it is very difficult to navigate. So knowing that you have these programs, and the fact that you're indicating that it's open to people who want to know how to navigate this system.
Yeah. The schools are invaluable to us. In fact, we each year, for the past few years, Dar Al-Hijrah has provided during Teacher Appreciation Lunch. During Teacher Appreciation Week, a hot lunch provided by our chef, our beloved chef, Idrisi, that I mentioned earlier. Each of the directors will take this full hot lunch to one of the schools in our area, especially the ones serving a high population of Muslim families, to provide the lunch. This year, Teacher Appreciation Week fell during the holy month of Ramadan, so it complicated our ability to provide that lunch. And what we said is we think teachers should be appreciated every week of the year. So we changed it this year to be a back-to-school lunch, and we're heading out on the 9th in another week or so to get that hot lunch to them.
That's fantastic. Well, I have to say I appreciate both of you being here. Saif, Stacey, you really have, this has been so illuminating on so many levels. And I promise I am going to get out to Dar Al-Hijrah Islamic Center, because I can say it now a little bit better, and visit, because I think your programs are amazing. I think what you're doing for the Culmore community as a whole is absolutely critical. For those of you listening, this has been Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. You can hear us here every Thursday night at 9 p.m. So join us next week. Making Change Radio.